Welcome to Tell Us Your Story with Dr. Ebony. I am Dr. Ebony. Today's topic is all the single dads. My guest today is Tom Campbell. Welcome, Tom. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. You know, for our normal viewers, as usual, I give full disclosure on how I know the people that I'll be speaking with. So Tom and I met when he came to my family's house on a call because we needed an estimate on an extermination service. So let's just put it this way. He provided services for a while, and during that time, we had time to talk, and we found out we had a lot in common. And one of the things that we both had in common was the fact that we're both single parents. And that's kind of what gave me the idea for today's topic. Also, an important note as we go through this conversation, Tom's child is now grown up and living her own life now. So sometimes if I refer as kind of past tense, that's where that comes from. And yes, he's still her parent.
I'm still holding on to that title.
Right.
Definitely retaining that title.
All right. So Tom, let's get started. First of all, how do you classify yourself in regards to your gender identity as well as your ethnic background?
I guess I would be a white male.
Okay. All right. So where did you grow up and what was your family makeup and household structure?
I grew up, so I was born in Walnut Creek, California, which is just across the bay, basically the San Francisco Bay Area. Until I was about 4 years old. My mom moved me at a very young age to the Baltimore area where she was originally from. And we only lived there for a couple of years. So when people ask me where I'm from, it's kind of a mixed question, but I always identify as being a San Francisco native because at a very young age, at 7, we moved back to the Bay Area. And I lived in the Marina District in San Francisco for almost 20 years. So I identify as a San Francisco native. I was born there. I lived most of my life there, almost 35 years of my life. So San Francisco, California. My home life wasn't horrible, but it wasn't amazing either. I had the unfortunate pleasure of growing up in an alcoholic household. My mom was the oldest of 16 kids. So growing up as a child, she had some rough hands dealt at a very young age. She was, I guess you would call the surrogate mom to however many brothers and sisters circulated through her life before she shipped off to college. Right. And then never looked back and moved to San Francisco in the 60s and 70s. So my mom dealt with some alcohol issues and depression, but I guess I could always say that my mom provided and my stepdad provided what I needed. Maybe not always necessarily what I might have wanted, but for the most part, they fulfilled my needs. From an emotional standpoint, the fulfilling of my needs probably lacked quite a bit because of her anxiety and depression and issues. Like her own emotional issues made it very difficult for her to be, my mom, like a loving parent. But yeah, not a tough, horrible childhood, but not wonderful either.
Okay. All right. So from your experiences during your formative years, did you ever envision yourself as a parent?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I knew, I think, to sound a little twisted, but I think one of the main reasons I always visioned myself as being at least a parent of one was I wanted to capitalize on the mistakes made by my mom and specifically my real father. My biological father was not a wonderful human being. He was very abusive to my mom and very abusive to me at a very young age until she had the wherewithal and the bravery and the resources to bail. So I wanted to have a child where, I wouldn't make those same mistakes. I could provide her with a better life than what my parents had provided me. But I also had always wanted to have a child. I wanted to be a father for sure.
Okay. All right. So with as much detail or as little detail as you would like to give about how you became a single parent, when you became the single parent, can you describe the feeling that you had behind it and what did that mean to you?
Well, my daughter's mother and I were never married. So technically I've always been a single parent, but at one point in time we were together. We did have a loving relationship, but it was not long lived. It was maybe a year and a half into my daughter's life. She was probably a year and a half, 2 years old, where the pieces kind of started to fall apart. And I just, I actually decided that I was better off, that she was better off, that our daughter was better off if we were apart. And that's when I moved into my own house. So I would say, yeah, probably around 2003, I became a, single parent living out on my own and then seeking visitation and jumping through all those wonderful hoops.
Wow. Okay. You mentioned all the wonderful hoops.
Yeah.
And there are quite a few. And I don't think a lot of people realize, no matter if you're the father or the mother or just the general guardian of a child, you have to go through a lot in order to legally make sure that can happen.
Absolutely.
Even if they are the biological child. So,
right.
So what kind of things did you have to go through in order to make sure that you could be in your daughter's life?
That's a great question. That's a very dynamic question, and that could be just an hour-long answer. But I'll make it short-winded. I'll condense it. A lot of legal counsel, a lot of legal information, because let's face it, in normal lives, men and women, when they part, you're always going to have issues. They're going to butt heads. Only in a perfect world is everything amicable and the visitation's amicable and just everything's hunky dory. That's in a perfect world. And unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world. So, when there's visitation issues, and I was very passionate about spending as much time humanly possible with my daughter, I didn't want to be like my dad, where he would see me once a week, 1 week every year and a half. There was no way that was ever going to work for me. And my ex battled me a little bit on the visitation at first. We tried to do the amicable thing, work together, and it failed. So I had to retain a lawyer. I had to seek legal counsel. I had to seek legal advice. But I also wanted to do it reasonably. I didn't want to create any more friction than had already existed. So, I didn't want to rake her over the coals. I didn't want to, I just didn't want to do that. I didn't want to proceed with that type of negative energy. So I asked for what I thought was reasonable. Every other weekend, we would rotate the holidays. My ex wasn't a big fan of Halloween, so I asked for every Halloween, whether it was on a Tuesday night or a Saturday night. Okay. And that was honestly about it. And she fought it a little bit, so we had to go through mediation. And then, of course, I had to retain my lawyer again for further court visits. And eventually I got very lucky and I won. And I received everything that I wanted because the judge agreed that my visitation requests were extremely reasonable. Mm-hmm. But even with that, it was still a constant struggle because the level of enforcement is basically zero. There, unless, and I'm not saying this to be stereotyped, but if it was the father refusing to return the child or allow the visitation, he would most likely be getting a knock on the door from DCSS or law enforcement. But when it was her refusing to allow me to pick up my daughter, even though it was a court-ordered thing, or she would come up with an excuse, or she had a sniffle, and it's like, well, I'm a grown man, I can handle a 4-year-old sniffle. Right. There was a lot of commotion for the first year or two. Mm-hmm. And then it finally started to settle in. the every other weekend thing worked. I always try my best to be as nice as possible. So I knew I could like sneak in that little extra visit. You know, she's off on Monday. You know,
Right.
we were going to go to the zoo kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then as the years went by, you know, we started getting into year, you know, when she turned 4, 5, 6, she started growing up a little bit. I think it was actually at like 4 years old where we took our first cross country trip.
Wow.
And that required, for lack of a better term, an absolute act of God. I had to fight for that. She just did not want our daughter to meet my family. It was just, it was a little bit of a friction thing. She had never met my family, so I kind of got it. But,
Right.
you know, in the end, I prevailed, and we were able to spend an amazing week. She got to meet my mom, which was incredible. My mom was able to meet her granddaughter for the first time since she was, you know, a tiny little baby.
Oh, that's
So
nice.
that was an amazing opportunity. But yeah, I'm kind of rambling on here a little bit, but it was a battle. It was definitely an emotional struggle, and it does kind of take a toll. It takes its toll on you for sure. You age when you have to deal with that type of anxiety. If you care the least bit about that valuable time you're going to spend with your child and you fight for it, it's definitely going to have an impact on you.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I'm glad you brought that up as far as the physical toll and just the mental, physical, just it takes everything out of you. And people don't understand, you know, how emotionally wrapped up you can get into it.
Right.
So, and it really does affect you. It, you know, again,
and it's hard to not get bitter about it too. You know, it's hard to not get angry and let your emotions get the best of you. And you have to, you know, there was this saying in the Army. I spent just a short period of time in the Army, 5 years. And, you know, anybody that I ever worked with in the field, they always told us your most important ally is radio silence. Don't say anything. Don't say anything, because the second you open your mouth, you'll give away your position. And in a relationship type environment, the second you open your mouth, you say something that you will regret. You'll say something nasty. You'll say something mean. And one, it's not fair. You know, you don't want to be mean, but you also don't want to give that person the ability to use that against you. And I saw that a lot with my mom and my dad. I mean, it was just like, dude, constant clashes. And my dad said some pretty horrible things about my mom. And as I became a young man, I realized, like, wow, you know, what a jerk. You know, I could use a lot of different words, of course, but you know, I didn't want to do that. And that alone is exhausting too. You know, you go through all the, you know, anger is draining. Resentment just really takes its toll. So yeah, it's definitely a lot of work.
So how were you able to get through that without all the anger and resentment? Did it just take a lot of time, or?
I've been pretty lucky, Ebony. Like in my life, I have, I've always stayed in really good shape, or at least decent shape. You know, I was an athlete in high school and college. I played baseball, and I've always been into rock climbing and spending time in the outdoors. And those weren't just hobbies to me. Like the time that I've spent in my life outdoors, whether it was rock climbing or mountaineering or backpacking, those have been passions in my life. And then on top of that, you know, my next big passion was, of course, semi-related to my profession, and that was my background in zoology and wildlife biology. So I work closely, you know, I specialize in a niche called herpetology, which is reptiles and amphibians. So that was, you know, I had two huge passion projects in my life, aside from my daughter, of course. I had my climbing life and my reptile life, my animal education life. So those were extremely therapeutic. And till this day, they still very much are a huge part of my life. I can have an awful work week. I could get some bad news from home, and then I can go climbing for the weekend and wake up, you know, come back to work Monday morning and feel like $1 million. It really helped me just kind of flush out all of the excess, all of the fodder, and reset, I guess, really just hit the reset button. and then start the week off with a whole other like bag of stress or anxiety or whatever else like down the chute. So
okay, all right. So I know you had mentioned earlier about wanting to become a parent so that you could basically just do it better than what you saw growing up. So like, how did you decide how to define your role as a father?
oh wow, I mean that's a multi-tiered question. I guess I learned from the mistakes of my parents, of course. So I immediately set some boundaries for myself, some standards for myself. I would not drink alcohol in front of my daughter. I would never lose my temper in front of my daughter. And we would spend a boatload of time outside. So I loved being outdoors ever since I was a kid. And I wanted to expose my daughter to that. So I always pictured myself as kind of like the outdoor hippie dad. You know, I want to take my daughter to Half Dome when she's 4 years old. I want her to see these things outside.
Right.
I wanted her to understand that there's more to this world as a human being than simply growing up, going to school, getting a job, buying a house, having kids, and then being broke. And that's like, that was me. You know, I was that kind of a dad. I was the dad that could take my daughter to soccer practice even when she was 17 or 18 years old. And not only could I participate, but I could compete. You know, I was strong, I was athletic, and I always was able to be present. And not just simply be present, not just exist in the moment, but live with her in the moment. So I guess I was always, that was the kind of parent that I wanted to be. I wanted to leave that impact on my child.
Wow. So
I think I answered that question.
Yeah, you did. You nailed it.
All right.
That was perfect. I mean, you explained how. So, you know, we're talking about the definition of fatherhood. And how do you think your definition of fatherhood was different from the American societal expectations?
Oh, dude. Oh.
I didn't even finish the question. You're already saying, whoa. So let's stop it right there so you can answer that part. Well, I was just going to say, or did you find that what your definition of fatherhood was actually exceeded the expectations? And how did you know that?
I feel like I exceeded the expectations of your average everyday American father, or the you know, the concept of this. You know, I mean, I could talk about this all day. I think that we've kind of gone down a rabbit hole in this country when it comes to parenting and money and careers. And I think I exceeded because I allowed my daughter to see that there are more opportunities in life than just simply having to go to college and having to go out and get this great job and having to have a career and make money. And I think those things are great if, you know, different strokes for different folks, right? But I really feel like as a species, we have lost contact with what is just like absolutely the most vital piece of why we're here. And for whatever reason we're here, I'm a little bit of an atheist, but I believe there is a reason we're here. And I don't think that reason is to work 50 hours a week, making $20 an hour until we're 70 years old and not ambulatory and able to do the things that we always dreamed about. So I feel like I exceeded as a father in that I was able to show my daughter, hey, there's more to life. Look, yes, going to work is important and you need to make money because you need money for food and shelter and you need to make money to survive. But I think I opened her up to, you know, some different avenues. But I feel like, yeah, the American, like this, you know, so there's a great quote. George Carlin was a hero of mine as a child. He was a great comedian in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. Right. But he had a great line in one of his shows, and it was, you know why they call it the American dream? Because you have to be asleep to believe in it. And I feel like, and I had this discussion with one of my employees today. He was saying, Tom, that's my goal right there. And he pointed at this big 3-story house in Wildwood with the perfect yard and 6 SUVs parked in the front yard. And I'm like, no, but his reasoning for that was, I want to provide my child. I want my son to have everything. And my argument was, what does a big house and a bunch of fancy SUVs have anything to do with giving your son a good life?
Right.
What about your life? What about what's best for you? Because you are useless to your child and anybody else around you if you look like you're 60 by the time you turn 42. Right. And you're spent up. And I think that's what happens. We get sucked into this wormhole of, I have to do this. I have to have this by this age. I have to live here by the time I'm this age. And dude, that's for the birds. Like, I think we need to get away from that so our children can start expressing themselves a little more creatively. Yeah. And they can open themselves up to these different options. Like, I lived in a 1-story little dumper house, and I gave my child an amazing life. Right. She traveled all around the country with me. We did reptile shows. She's climbed Half Dome.
Wow.
She climbed Half Dome with me. How many 10-year-olds are able to tell that story to their friends at school or their relatives, their aunts and uncles? Hey, I climbed Half Dome with my dad. It took us 15 hours, but we did it. Mm-hmm. So I think really exposing my daughter to the outdoors and wildlife and animals and just other things that were enriching really like separated me from JoJo All-American Dad with the white picket fence and the dog named Spot and all that, all that stuff, dude. And it's not that I couldn't have those things. Some people say, oh, well, you're opposed to that because you're just not capable of buying a big house. And I am. I just choose not to. I kind of live within my means. I'd rather have, some money in the bank when I turn 55 or 60 so I can travel to Europe when I'm still, moving around on my own 2 feet, and I can see the world and I can experience different cultures and eat different foods and just fire the brain instead of doing the, walking to the beat of the same drum every damn day until, I'm on my deathbed.
Right.
So I really feel like when it comes to the All-American Dad and me, those are all the things that definitely separate me from the rest of the pack, for sure.
Yes, definitely. Even just with you being exposed to my children just a little bit, they think you're the coolest person ever. So you at least have my 2 girls' approval. So, so, not only you as a single dad, but you also had an extra element because your daughter is also multi-ethnic. So correct. Do you think that may have added an extra layer to your single dad experience?
I think in her teenage years, yes, absolutely. Because of course, the older we get, the older the people are that we're hanging out with. And young kids really don't see race and color until they reach a certain age, or unless, unfortunately, they're exposed to that culture at a young age and taught, hate is taught, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's what we've learned. At first, my daughter is from a Honduran background, so she's a Latina of Latina ethnicity. Her high school years were a little difficult. And I would have to say her high school years when she moved here for the end of her sophomore year and then her full junior and senior year were very difficult because she was exposed to some racism and some bigotry, not just from fellow classmates, but also from one individual in particular that was involved with their athletic department, and then one of her main teachers. So that made it very difficult. That raised the stakes for sure, because it's hard to not take that personally. And I'm the whitest guy on the block, dude. I mean, you look up a picture of me in the Webster Dictionary, white boy, there's Tom Campbell. until you talk to me.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, whoa, he's definitely from California. Right. That's the least white dude I've ever met in my life. But, and around here, it's funny, like I have a lot of wonderful customers because we're an eco-friendly pest control company. So we attract a specific demographic. And they're like, you're not from here. We know you're not from here. And we like that. But yeah, for my daughter, it was like, man, I always knew that racism existed because I'd been exposed to it and I've witnessed a ton of it here in person. But when my daughter was the victim of it, right, definitely changes the game a little bit for sure. That was a game changer for me.
In what way was it a game changer?
I think just knowing that like your child is just simply under attack because she speaks a different language and has a different skin color and is a member of a different ethnicity, a non-white, non-Anglo, non-American ethnicity, which doesn't even make sense because we're not even from here.
Right.
You know, I don't have any Native American heritage, but I think you know what I mean when I say that.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, as a father, it was frustrating because it's like, well, now what do I do? Do you go on the defensive? Do you contact it? You know, I think I handled it appropriately. I contacted the state newspaper and I exposed this particular high school at the absolute highest level because I tried to be reasonable. Right. And I played the devil's advocate and I spoke with the principal and I spoke with the two individuals who painted an entirely different picture, of course, of what they said, but did eventually end up admitting to one of them called my daughter a California snowflake. And there was a little bit of the other one, there was, a racial word that I won't use in this interview, but it was definitely derogatory. Right. And it was specifically derogatory towards Latinos. And they didn't do anything about it. So I contacted a couple newspapers. I contacted WLTX. I contacted WIS. And unfortunately, the only one of like maybe 6 media outlets I contacted, one of them acted on it and wrote a really small piece about racism in the schools. But yeah, so that made it really difficult as a dad because, I wanted to react as like a big brother. I wanted to go down there and act a fool, but you can't do that. One, I don't want to go to jail. I'm from San Francisco. I would not do well in a Richland County jail, even for an hour. So, and that's just not the way to handle things. Violence has never been my answer. I've been in one fight my entire life, and it was with my best friend. We were 10, and it was over like a kickball game. So, yeah, I think that added a heightened level of difficulty to being a dad and seeing how someone can really hurt your child and you're somewhat defenseless in that environment. I think had we been in a different part of the country, exposed to a different demographic of people, I think I probably could have burned the house down. But unfortunately, I was in rural, redneck, podunk, Lexington County, South Carolina, and my options were limited. So, but that it made it hard. It was hard to be a dad through that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I remember because I think you called me about some advice on something, and I was like, "Hey, use your white man card." I said, "You are in the South. Use your white man card."
That's right. I do remember that. Yeah, I reached out to quite a few people. I think you were like at the top of the list for sure.
Yes. So, yeah, that was heartbreaking. And the thing about that is now it's even more so, especially in the area that you're referring to, and it's gotten worse.
Yeah.
But now let's get back to being the single dad. So what are some misconceptions that you've come across over the years as a single parent that you just absolutely...
Single dads have it made. They can do whatever they want, whenever they want. You can date whoever you want, whenever you want. You've got all this free time. You've got all this money. Wrong. Child support, food, right. House. I mean, I wanted to provide for my daughter the things that I didn't have. I grew up in a tiny little apartment, little single or second story flat. I wanted a nice little house, a yard. All those things cost money. Child support costs money. Being a single dad isn't the most wonderful gig in the world. It makes your social life very difficult, just your social life. I'm not talking about dating life. I mean, that's not even a whole other ballpark. That's a whole other planet.
Right. And that's going to be my next question. So
yeah. It's tough. But I mean, there are a lot of misconceptions regarding the benefits of being a single dad. I think one being the most obvious, being a single dad sucks. Nobody wants to be a single parent. Right. You want that other half involved. This is the first time in almost 14 years of my life where I've had a serious, steady girlfriend who actually lives in the same house with me. And I love it. Like, I love having that sounding board. I love having a partner. I love having a friend, someone I can trust. Right. Someone that'll deal with your BS when you're having, some rough times. And I never had that. I never had that. I had to seek advice from my mom, and she was, that's a tough one. And then all of my other buddies, of course, were all single dads. So I was like, I'm going to get advice from another single dad. See how that's not going to work.
Go work too well.
I think just that alone, being a single dad is the most misleading aspect of, I guess, what you would call the benefit of. There are no benefits to it. Right. There are no benefits. Maybe you get to watch whatever movies you want at night. You can sneak on
So you were saying that there was a song, and that's where everything kind of froze.
Oh, no. So what I was saying was that I guess the one benefit to being a single father was that my daughter could stay up with me a little bit later than mom might have wanted her to stay up. And we could watch that little, kind of a spooky movie if we wanted to. And, just little things like that. But no real true benefit to being a single parent, a single father.
Right. Okay. So you kind of mentioned the whole dating scene and how difficult it was. So describe that for you, going through the motions. Right. Over the years, because it is different as a single parent. Sometimes you just want to talk to another adult.
For sure.
So how was that for you? I know you kind of touched on it a little bit in the last question, but
yeah. So I was actually pretty lucky. When Natalia was young, I would say in the 3-ish neighborhood, maybe 3 or 4, I had a wonderful girlfriend in my life. And we were together for almost 6 years. And unfortunately, things happened and we wound up breaking up. But she was a staple in my daughter's life for 6 years. I wouldn't say stepmom. She was more like step friend, step best friend. She was amazing to me. She put up with my noise, dude. I don't know how for 6 years, but she was incredible for my daughter. They would spend their own time together occasionally. They go see their own movie together, or they go do lunch together. And that was kind of rare because I did value my time. So anytime my daughter was around, of course, I wanted to capitalize on every second. But it was one of those relationships where the girlfriend and the young, 5-year-old daughter could go and have lunch alone together.
Right.
So I was actually really lucky. But after that, of course, the older she got, I would say 10 years old and up, 10 years to present, my dating life was a little bit of a hurricane. Just dude, a lot of coming and going. And it may have even reached a point where I just decided I don't want a woman in my life right now. There's just too much. It just requires too much energy. I wouldn't say being a single dad made that difficult. It was just, there were little micro challenges that were kind of attached to that.
So what is a micro challenge?
A micro challenge would just be, that phone call that I would get from the ex, the argument, the drama, all the BS attached to the butting of the heads with the old mom and dad, little, they call baby mama drama or baby daddy drama.
Right.
And I would never want to expose a girlfriend to that or a lady friend to that. And that would occasionally happen. It's just like a cancer, dude. It just gobbles you up. It gobbles everybody up. It's all encompassing. Nobody is immune to it. No matter how little they're around, if they're even around you a little bit, it's going to impact you. That energy just bleeds out and it latches on to anybody else that's around.
Yeah.
So I would say that was like one of probably the most obvious like micro challenge for me. Everything else I really feel like was not a big deal. I think it's probably a little bit harder for single moms than it is for single dads. I think men are kind of picky when it comes to that. I'll be honest. I'll be the first one to admit, when I was like a dating profile kind of guy, and that was a very short-lived life. If I encountered a profile and she had, 3 or 4 kids, that was a no, because I knew that, and it wasn't because she had children. It was just because I knew there was no way my lifestyle would gel with someone who has even 2 children, because I like to travel. I like to climb. I like to be on the move, and you just can't do that. You just can't do that. But as a single dad, it's a little different, because you only have, I only have my daughter, maybe a grand total of, let's say it was a long month, October, I'd have her for 3 weekends. And then I'd have her like maybe every other Wednesday. So you're talking a grand total of maybe 10 days in a full month. But on average, it was like maybe 4 days, like 4 to 6 days, every other weekend. There's pretty much 4 weekends in a month. I'm getting her for 2. That's 4 days.
Right.
So, that gives me 26 or 27 other days to travel and do my thing and be with my girlfriend and go run amok. But a little bit different for single moms and single dads.
Okay. All right. Well, it's nice of you to kind of bring up that distinction. Okay. So what would you like to tell society about being a single dad that you hadn't already said?
Tell society about being a single dad. I would say, don't feel obligated to stay in an unhealthy, unhappy relationship because you're afraid of becoming a single parent. You will be much more valuable, not only to yourself, but to your child, if you take care of yourself and if you're happy. Your emotional health, your mental health, and your physical health are of the utmost importance. Because if those aren't dialed in, if you don't have those aspects of your life squared away, you're going to be a mess. And if you're a mess, you're not going to be fully present for your child. So don't be afraid of being a single parent. I guess that would be my message to society. I see a lot of people, a lot of unhappy married folks in these relationships, in these marriages, because they feel like they have to do it. They feel like there's some kind of a societal obligation to stay married to this person that you don't want to be with anymore. And let's face it, when the flame goes out on that candle, it's probably not coming back. Loving someone and being in love with someone are 2 entirely different realms. I still love my daughter's mom, but there's no way in hell I'd ever want to live with her again. And she wouldn't want to live with me. So it's the feeling is extremely mutual. But I don't think I think that would be my message. Don't feel obligated to stay. Don't fear being a single parent and stay with someone and be unhappy and ruin your life because you feel obligated to. Be a single parent if you think that's what's going to be the most healthy option.
Okay. Now, taking that advice, if you could go back in time and talk to your younger self Would you give yourself that same advice, or would you give yourself
Oh,
different advice?
oh God, dude. I don't know. That's a tough hypothetical. I mean, I certainly wouldn't change being a father,
Right.
but I would probably maybe change who I became a father with. But
Ah,
that's impossible.
mhm.
That's impossible. I don't think I'd give myself any advice.
Gotcha.
Maybe get out of that household a little bit sooner than 2 years.
Mm,
Maybe I would have, Natalia would have been born. I would have been present for a few months, and then I would have moved on and, started kind of carving my own path,
right.
making my own. But yeah, maybe I wouldn't have. I kind of lingered on a little bit there for like a year and a half because I kind of felt like I had to. It's like, I
Mm,
got to be the dad. I have
right.
to be. She doesn't have a job. And I'm like, well, that's not my problem that
Right.
she doesn't have a job. Natalia's 2. We have people we can rely on for babysitting and daycare and things like that. I
Mhm.
can't keep ruining myself because of her shortcomings.
Right.
I don't think women should do that either.
Right.
If the roles had been reversed, then I don't think she should have had to stick around for a year and a half or 2 years and been unhappy because I wasn't able to get my stuff together.
Hmm.
So I don't feel that way just for men. I feel that way for women as well. I think that pendulum swings both ways for sure.
Right. Right. I definitely agree with you on that. So totally. So what advice would you give other single dads that are still having to deal with their offspring being in the nest?
Being in the nest.
Yes.
Um, so the kids are living at home full time.
Yes.
So if they're living, I mean, if they're single dads and
Mm-hmm.
the child is living with the dad full time,
Mm-hmm.
geez, I know, try to have a good relationship with the mom, get rid of all that baby mama drama BS. Let's start a different culture in regards to that. Take good care of your credit. Don't feel like you have to. Don't feel like you have to give your child everything they want. Give them what they need. I guess a good balance. That's a tough question.
Mm-hmm.
That's a tough question because there's a lot of discretion there. I would say I think the most important thing is if you're a single dad and your children or your child are living with you full time, you have full custody. Make things work with mom and make sure that they can have a relationship with mom.
Mm.
Don't drive a wedge between that, unless of course there's some major, serious circumstances that may exist, like if there's an abuse thing or something going on.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, if this is just single dad Joe Schmo who just so happened to get lucky, I don't know how that happened. How did you get full custody, bro? I want your lawyer's phone number 20 years ago, man. Yeah, just maintain
Mm-hmm.
that good relationship with mom, be amicable, because all that negativity BS is just, like I was saying earlier, it's just a cancer that just sucks you dry.
Right. Right. And you mentioned
That'd be my
something,
guess.
you mentioned something that you don't hear people even speak about. And you said
Yeah,
credit. Protect
credit's
your
huge.
credit. I mean, that is huge as a single parent. I
Yeah,
know that in my situation, my credit was ruined. So once
in a
I
divorce.
finally got out, yeah. So I
Yeah,
couldn't, it's prevented me from doing a lot of stuff that I
yeah,
needed to do as a single parent. So I think that
right.
is very important for, to hear, especially from a man, that, hey, you got to protect your credit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Don't go out and buy that PS6. That PlayStation 6, man. You don't need it. You don't need it. You need a fridge. You need a washer and dryer. You need reliable wheels.
Mm-hmm.
A car with 4 tires. It's got to have 4. Or it's not going anywhere. Yeah, and credit is the lifeblood.
Right.
And I didn't realize this up until about 7 or 8 years ago. I don't know if you know this, Ebony, but I just grew up. I'm
I didn't
45,
know that.
but I was a child 8 years ago. I mean,
Wow.
I had a 510 credit score, dude. I as dumb as they come when it comes to managing your credit. And it wasn't necessarily my fault. I didn't have those tools when I was a kid. I didn't have a mentor. Like, we didn't have classes in school that were like, dude, protect your credit, or you're going to be driving a jalopy until you're 60. So I learned, like, it was trial and error, and it was just a stroke of luck. And I'm sitting on an 810. I have a great credit score, but I mean, it can turn at the drop of a hat.
Right.
One late payment, just anything can happen. And that's another reason that kind of leads back to why I am always preaching, like, live within your means. You don't need that big 3-story house. You don't need an $80,000 Mercedes SUV, because the second something falls apart, or you get in a car accident, or you break your ankle, or the dookie hits the fan,
right,
and you need to be making those 6 G's a month, and all of a sudden you're getting $1,800 a month in disability. Guess who's in deep doo-doo? Yeah. You. So credit, like I was saying, credit is the lifeblood of being a good parent, being a responsible parent, because now you can pass that data. In the climbing world, we call it beta. You can pass that beta on to your offspring. And it's like, look, this is why my credit has been so important. And this is why it is important for you to not make the mistakes that I did. Right. So, at 20 years old, you're not driving a bucket with 3.5 tires. You can establish some credit. So maybe someday, you can buy that little house, or you can buy yourself a nice little car that's dependable. It's just, dude, it's all about leverage. You want to give yourself that leverage, because you want a level playing field. And if you have bad credit, the playing field is not level. This is a credit world. And this is you trying to buy a bucket at Sam's Auto Shop, with 680,000 miles on it and 4 bald tires. So yeah, I think it is. And let's not forget about the ability to get a job, dude. Nowadays, it's like these people. When I have no problems revealing this, when we interview an individual for a potential pest control position, not only do we run a SLED background check for the state of South Carolina, we run a federal background check, and we run their credit, dude. Right. Because your credit says a lot about you. And and it's like, there's a difference between someone who has a bad credit score because they didn't pay a few credit card bills, or someone who owes, $100,000. You know what I mean? Right. There's a little bit of discretion when it comes to making that judgment call, and we're capable of doing that because we're a private company. And I can give a guy a little bit of a break. It's like, a few bogus credit cards, no big deal. Right. Seems like a good candidate. Let's hire him. But, some of these other bigger companies, they look at it as a measurement of your integrity. Are you responsible? If we hire you and you have all these negative knocks on your credit, are your wages going to be getting garnished, in 6 months? Really, it's an integrity thing. But it also, when you're renting a home, if you want to rent a house, if you want to rent a car, you can't do any of that without a legit credit record or a credit card. You can't rent a car without a credit card, which means you probably can't go on vacation anywhere unless you want to walk. But yeah, credit
with a friend.
Right? Yeah. Yes, man, lives there. Yeah, I think credit is very important. I've learned a lot over the last 5 or 6 years about the value of quality credit score and debt to income ratio too. Like, I just learned about that a few years ago. And the sooner you have that knowledge and that information from your mom or your dad, the better off you are. It's just all those little extra tools that will help you succeed. Credit is definitely a big deal.
Okay. Yeah. And I think they're starting to teach that in some schools also, especially schools.
Should have been 30 years ago.
Right. Exactly. We might be in a different situation. You probably would have grown up sooner than 8 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well, I'd be rocking an 850 right now if that was the case.
right. So now we're getting close to the end of the interview. And we have two final questions. These are the most humanizing questions for the entire conversation. And the reason I consider them to be the most humanizing is because they are about music.
Ooh, yeah.
So I know you were like this. So what is your favorite song that represents you?
Oh, wow. Dude.
I knew I would get a dude on that one.
Jeez. There's Against the Wind is one that has always really resonated with me. Like I've heard it a million times. And every time I hear that song, I think it would be a tie between Against the Wind by Bob Seger and a song by Audio Slave called I Am the Highway. Those two really strike a chord with me just because that's a tough one. That's a tough one to dive into. I don't know if there's really an answer to that. There's just an energy about that song. The lyrics, the composition of the music have always really touched me because they're about the journey. It's even hard for me to talk about because those are two very emotional pieces of music that definitely ring true, like with just my life journey, my mom's journey. So yeah, I would have to say that's an absolute 100% tie. I Am the Highway by Audio Slave and Against the Wind by Bob Seger.
Both really good songs.
Yeah.
And finally, what song do you believe best represents single dads?
Single dads? Oh, dude, I don't know. This might sound kind of crazy, but the one song that has always reminded me of like a single parent would be, what's the name of that song by Tupac? Mama something Mama.
Dear Mama?
Dear Mama. Yeah. I cannot listen to that song without thinking about the struggles of my single mom having to deal with my pain in the ass, being the teenage son that I was. But as far as a single dad, that's a tough one. I don't think I've ever heard a song that sends a single dad message, but Dear Mama for sure. Every time I hear that song, it's like I get choked up because even though, Tupac and I kind of come from two entirely different cultures, I think we both, if Tupac and I had been buddies in high school, I think we would have hit it off and probably gotten into a lot of trouble together.
Somehow I would not doubt that.
Yeah. So that's probably the one that really hits it for me with single parenthood.
Okay. All right. So Tom, thank you so much for your time and telling us your story.
Of course, my pleasure.
To all of you, thank you for watching. Take care, and may there be peace, love, understanding, and social justice for all.
Roger that. Thanks, Ebony. Thanks for having me.